Yeah, I think that's huge. And it's even huge, for the mindset of England. They would have looked at that Scotland game and seen the amount of injuries Ireland had, and they would have maybe get a bit of a boost thinking that we had lost so many players. So to see the likes of Cian come back in and Doris is huge. And, you have the likes of Tyke Furlong who put in a huge shift last week, and Gibson Park starting as well. So obviously the only casualties of that is Henderson and Ringrose, and obviously Ringrose is a huge loss, but I think it's just brilliant, and I think it's a credit to Ireland, and it's brilliant that we have such depth in so many different areas.
Yeah, for anyone who missed the team earlier today, so Dan Sheehan and Caelan Doris both fit to play, winning their races after picking up knocks last week against Scotland. 3 changes in all from the team that started at Murrayfield. 2 of them are enforced. Robbie Henshaw comes in for Gary Ringrose, while Ryan Baird will get his 3rd test start, coming into the second row for Ian Henderson. And the other change, Cian, is that Jameson Gibson Park gets the nod after a very impressive cameo. Brian O'Driscoll was talking about how his passing transformed the play when he came on last week. So he comes in for Conor Murray, and Murray's going to be on the bench.
Yeah, I think it's a fair call. I think this time, well, not this time last week, but when we were chatting, Will, on the show last week, I was saying that I felt Conor Murray was fully deserving of his starting place, and I still think Conor Murray has had a very good Six Nations. I think he was almost a bit of a victim of Ireland's poor breakdown last week in the first half against Scotland. He kind of got caught up in bits and pieces because I think other players around him weren't doing their job, which actually had a bit of a negative impact in terms of how Ireland were able to play in that first half. So I don't think it's a slide on Conor Murray that he's been dropped to the bench. I think I made this point last week. Gibson Park is still Ireland's first choice scrum half. It made a lot of sense to use him off the bench last week, and he made such an important impact. So the roles will be reversed this week, and I'd have no doubt that Conor Murray will come on and make a big impact as well. I think when he was starting to end up on the Ireland bench, when Gibson Park ended up overtaking him, there was a lot of chat around what's the point in having Conor Murray on the bench? He doesn't add tempo that what Ireland need in the second half. Maybe you need someone like a Craig Casey. But you saw in Twickenham last year against 14-man England, when Ireland kind of struggled a little bit to eventually get over the line, but Conor Murray came off the bench that day and was exceptional as well. So he's more than capable, I think, of bringing the impact that Gibson Park did last week in his own kind of way. But having Gibson Park back in the starting team, like Grace said, in terms of having Sheehan and Doris back as well, it's just a massive boost. And I suppose it's a reflection of the medical staff probably working overtime this week to get 2 guys who they look like they could have been out for a while, let alone play again with a 6-day turnaround. So it's remarkable, really. And I'd gotten word early in the week that they were going to be okay, and you were kind of going, really, can this be the case? So you'd hope that they're going to be able to operate close to 100%. They're hardly going to be fully fit, but this is the kind of game where it's a once in a lifetime potentially opportunity. Like you touched on, Will, at the start, no Irish team has ever won a Grand Slam in Dublin, so it would have taken a lot, I think, for any of these guys to miss out on this, and it's brilliant to have them back.
Yeah, potentially Grand Slam to be won by the 20s in Cork this coming weekend as well. But the Ireland team in full then, you've got a back three, they've got 8 tries between them so far: Hugo Keenan, Mac Hansen and James Lowe. Centres are Robbie Henshaw and Bundy Aki. And Grace, with those two being combined, given the amount of rugby they've played together, going back to Robbie Henshaw's time at Connacht, it's a boost for Robbie Henshaw to have got 14-15 minutes into his legs last week in Murrayfield, and to be able to step in now for Ringrose alongside Aki this week.
Yeah, and that's the crucial thing, is he's getting game time, and he's getting game time against England after having so much time out. And if Ringrose maybe hadn't got injured, he mightn't get those minutes. So I think it's going to be crucial for him going into a World Cup, that they're trying out that combination. And as you say, they have their familiarity of working together. We've seen Bundy at 13, and Henshaw, just that brings that bit more dynamic to that 13 role, and it'll be interesting to see how they manage that 13 wing channel, and making sure that we don't have the same issues that we had against Italy, that there's good connection, and making sure that the push is coming from the inside with Bundy and connecting, and making sure we're covering off them outside channels. But it's brilliant to have him back, and it's like Gibson Park, he's getting game time now as well, so they're all getting game time under the belt after not having much game time this year. So I think that's just crucial, because you just see the amount of players that have been involved.
Yeah, I feel for Ringrose a little bit as well, Keeney. He's missed some key moments because of injuries he's picked up, and in this case he potentially misses out on a championship winning game.
It's gutting, like absolutely gutting. Like that's a guy who has played such a key part in all of Ireland's success over the last 12 months in particular. Like, you think he missed the third test in New Zealand as well after being so good in the first two tests. And yeah, like, you know, it was such a horrible moment. I was over in Murrayfield last weekend, and when he went down, like literally the crowd fell silent, and it was really eerie and it was awful. Thankfully the reports are that he's doing well, and my understanding is that on Tuesday when the Ireland team met up, Gary Ringrose was actually involved as well, not obviously training, but he was in team meetings and stuff, and I believe the squad got a massive boost off that as well, just to see him. He's a key part of the leadership group, as well as being an outstanding player on the pitch. So I think that speaks a lot about the culture that Andy Farrell has created as well. So obviously there was no pressure on Ringrose to come in or anything, but the fact he was able to kind of points to how much of a good place he's in. You know, you'd still probably expect maybe he might be stood down for a while. It's not his first head injury, but just from a personal point of view, it's just so disappointing. But I think he's the ultimate team player, like, you know, and he would love nothing more than to be at the Aviva on Saturday and see Ireland go and get the job done. And, you know, it's a chance, like Grace has touched on there, for Robbie Henshaw to come back, and it's a chance, I think, for Robbie Henshaw. I think Robbie Henshaw prefers playing 13. The problem is he's so good at playing 12, and Gary Ringrose is so good at 13. But I think Henshaw got pigeonholed a little bit, I think, in the previous era into being, you know,
it's important though to have one of the two fit for this, just to get the combos right.
Absolutely, like Grace touching it there, like it just didn't work with Stuart McCloskey and Bundy Aki, and I don't think even if Henshaw was out this weekend that we would have seen McCloskey and Bundy going together again, because it was just too clunky. They're two types of similar players, I think, really, but Henshaw is well capable of playing 13, so I wouldn't have any fears at all that the midfield issues that we saw in Rome we'll see again this weekend. I think Bundy is far more comfortable at 12. Robbie Henshaw can do a job at 13, and then when you have Sexton, of course, alongside them as well. So it's remarkable really when you're at this stage of the competition, not like obviously allowing for Ian Henderson, Gary Ringrose, Ronan Keller, who's missing out, and Tyg Byrne is worth mentioning as well. But the amount of guys who are actually coming back from injury at this stage of the tournament is so impressive as well. Obviously they've paid the price at the start of it, but like to bring back the calibre of Gibson Park and Robbie Henshaw and Tyg Furlong as well. So it just points, I think, to the strength and depth that Ireland are in. I think if this had been a scenario a couple of years ago, I think there would have been panic, spread through supporters, potentially through the team, like how are we going to cope with this many losses. But as Andy Farrell keeps saying, like, bring on the adversity. I'd say he's at the team hotel at the moment wondering, like, what can go wrong, and like let's bring it on. So it just speaks, I think, to the positive mindset of the coaches that's filtering down into the players.
Last week had to be up there, Grace, when as Cian mentions, adversity and having to deal with in-game situations, to have lost 3 year key forwards, to get into a situation where, as much as the guy relished it and he played brilliantly when Cian Healy came in, he hadn't played a hooker since he was in school, and essentially after the match you had Andy Farrell saying, we just kind of laughed about it as a group. We were like, nothing else can really go wrong, let's just roll with the punches and see how we can work this out. And Josh van der Fleer, who apparently, and based on Leinster's picture they put up, throws the ball in the odd time from the line out just as practice, I think as most forwards do at training, but he had no real formal experience of playing in a hooker position in lineouts. They had to just deal with all that last week, and they still held Scotland scoreless in the second half.
Yeah, and it's a testament to their performance coach, to that mindset. Instead of heads dropping and go, oh my God, we've just lost Ian Henderson and Caelan Doris. We've had a try disallowed, which injured Caelan Doris. What are we doing? This is a joke. Oh my God, this is going to be the banana skin. But to keep that momentum going, to have faith in the process, and as you say, like Cian Healy played hooker in school, but and then half me is like, are you sure? Like, this is a well-prepped Irish team. They seem to have gone above and beyond, whether it be mental, with their fitness, with their skill level. So like, would they have prepared? We've seen a lot of teams be bitten in the last few years where they've lost 2 front rows. I think, was it Italy last year, where they got a red card after getting an injury, and then they're down to 13 players. So I'm kind of going, did you do a bit of homework? Did you say, right, if this scenario happens, we can put Cian in? And, you're saying Van der Fleer, he did very well for someone that just does it the odd time. So, and then, it's credited them to keep their head going. And I think Scotland will be kicking themselves that they didn't, challenge more in the front of that line out and put them under pressure. But yeah, it's a really good mindset, and it's just keep going forward. You know what we used to say, like that, once the set piece is over, we know where we need to be. It doesn't matter what numbers are on our back, just keep going, and we know what the game plan is, no matter if we're out of position, in set piece. But yeah, so I think they can withstand anything now, and they'll just know, right, well, we can deal with it. We can still win ugly games, not play a full 80 minutes and wear teams down even with everyone out of position.
The Scottish team must be thinking back though, Cian, saying, because Josh Van der Fleer pointed out himself, he's like, the one thing I didn't want to happen was someone going, throw it out the back or do something complicated. He stayed conservative. The Irish players came to the front of the lineout, made his throws reasonably simple, but Ireland were very conservative as a result off the lineouts. Why didn't Scotland challenge them more? Rookie thrower.
It was bizarre. It was such a damning, I think, indictment on Scotland there. I think the coaching as well as the players, because if the players didn't have the smarts, which they should have at the time, then get the message down onto the pitch. Like, the funny thing was, Van der Fleer actually went to the tail for the first throw and had an overthrow, and you're kind of going, geez, like, this is like seriously like risky. But it was a kind of an interesting battle of wits, I think, because Scotland, the logical thing was throw to the front and just try and secure your ball. And you have to remember as well that Ian Henderson was off the pitch, who's Ireland's main line-out caller. So James Ryan took on the line-out calling, but also was helped out by Peter O'Mahony, who would call the line-outs in Munster. And I don't think you can underestimate the role that those two guys, and in particular Peter O'Mahony, like Peter O'Mahony clearly said to Josh Van der Fleer, if you throw the ball to the front, I will win it. Like, to have that kind of comfort blanket. And there were a couple of times where Scotland, did kind of attempt to challenge, but Peter O'Mahony no one was going to take the ball off him, and that takes a lot of leadership, I think, from a guy. And we speak about Scotland, kind of not having the intelligence to, step up and realise the situation. Well, you flipped on its head and look at how calm Ireland stayed. They didn't panic. As soon as Ronan Kelleher went down with about 10 minutes, I think, left in the first half, you could see Cian Healy down in front of us, came off the bench, and he was down on his hands and knees, practicing his line-out throw, and you're kind of going, wow, if this happens, like, Ireland are in serious trouble. We were chatting to Josh Van der Fleer yesterday, actually, and he was saying that Dan Sheehan has banned him now from line-out throwing in training, just in case he takes his place. Johnny Sexton seemingly has had to hide his kicking tee for fear that Van der Fleer will step up and start taking goal
quite
kicks.
worryingly, if you're Johnny Sexton right now. Maybe it's not worry from beyond December, but did you see the video that Leinster had out today?
Yeah, Cian Healy,
putting a drop goal over from basically the halfway line.
Yeah, and like Cian Healy, there's clips of Cian Healy doing rounds as well, of like in the warm-up, and he flicks the ball up with his, so these guys are just like superbly talented. Like, Andy Farrell was making the point after the game on Sunday that Josh Van der Fleer took up golf 3 years ago and he's already down to single figures. I mean, like, some people just get it all, don't they? Like, they just share it around a bit, like, so. But yeah, like, I mean, all jokes aside, like, for Ireland to have, recognised the issue, and Grace touched on an interesting point there about the fact that Cian Healy was put down on the team sheet, which is a really, really important thing. Like, it's just a bit of red tape, but if Cian Healy hadn't been marked as the hooker, then he wouldn't have been allowed play for safety reasons. But it was on the back of that Italy game that Ireland said, like, we need to do everything we can to never find ourselves in that situation. And again, it's such a stream of unlikely events that it would happen, that you would lose your two hookers, but they were prepared for it. I'd say they didn't think it would happen as soon as it did, but again, it just points to, I think, the coaching staff not wanting to leave any stone unturned. And like, it's so impressive that they've, managed to do it, and they're still managing to do it. And, I kind of joking there about Andy Farrell sitting in the hotel welcoming adversity, but if something was to happen, and if Caelan Doris or Dan Sheehan weren't quite fully fit by the time the game comes around, you'd have full confidence in whoever it is, be it Jack Conan or Rob Herring, to step in, because every one of these players seems to know their roles to an inch of its life, but also know, like, what do I have to do in a case of emergency, like Cian Healy and Josh Van der Fleer. Like, I'm sure there's guys in the squad who are practicing other roles, like a guy like Jimmy O'Brien, who's on the bench this weekend, has probably been training in each of the backs positions because he's so versatile. So it's just really, really impressive.
Grace, when it comes to this weekend, it seems in many ways there have been two goals that Jonathan Sexton has had for the last 3 or 4 years, which is to captain Leinster to try and win a Champions Cup. He could get the opportunity to do that at the Aviva Stadium later this year with the form that Leinster have shown, and he wanted to captain Ireland to a Six Nations title. I guess the cherry on top is the Grand Slam, potentially against England on Saturday evening as well. It looks like it's written in the stars. It's going to probably be his last ever game at the Aviva, because I would think he'd be rested for the warm-up games ahead of the World Cup. But he was a guy, when he was asked about it yesterday, was remarkably calm. He said, and I'm sure these are just the right things to say anyway, but he said, it's all about this game. It's not about me going past Ron Lagar's record. It's not about me thinking about what kind of ovation I'm going to get at full time at the Aviva this weekend. Johnny Sexton is entirely focused and keeping his emotions in check ahead of what's a huge game in his career.
Yeah, and that's it. You can get ahead of yourself and think of, oh, if we win this game, what it means, and it's my last game, and I'll never be in this situation again. But you can't, and I've no doubt, you look at the start of the year and they were second in the world. They just beat New Zealand, South Africa, Australia really toughly, and they knew they could beat France from previous matches. So, but they still didn't get ahead of themselves. They still took it one game at a time. They still focused on what they needed to improve on, and they talk about those, tiny changes, tiny improvements every week. It doesn't matter how good they are. And that's really hard to keep going when you are winning. And, I have no doubt on Saturday when he's out there, they'll all be focusing on their next job. What's my next job? Right, we score a try. Let's go. Let's regather this kick. Where are we going to be? What ruck do we need to win? And it's going to be about the performance. It's going to be nothing about, who's scoring, how many tries. Oh, Sexton, he needs to kick this because he's going to get, top point scorer ever. It's going to be just one moment at a time. And, we were talking about this going, there's no doubt, yeah, he'll have that enjoyment inside, but he'll be like, yeah, next job, great. I'm top of the scoreboard, but let's go. It means nothing if we don't beat England and, finish this game on a high. So, and then, yeah, once the final whistle blows, then it's like, wow, look what we've achieved, and try and relish that. I would have had regrets in the past of going next job, and even when the games are over and go, oh yeah, that's great, and not really relishing it. And I think our players now are getting a lot better of be in that present moment. And I know their performance coach speaks about it, but enjoy then after the fact that you're in Dublin. It's the first home Grand Slam, bar Belfast, if it happens, which you hope it would, and just relish it then when the final whistle goes, the pressure's off, and you can enjoy it then.
That's interesting, Grace. You say you probably didn't enjoy it in the moment, because I think back to, I remember looking at the pictures from Italy in the muck, in the dirt, when your team won the Grand Slam, and the great performance that your group of players had at the World Cup. I think it was only this week that they had Alison Miller's try up as one of the best tries in the history of the Women's World Cup, and everything that was achieved as a group, and the kind of, I guess, the groundbreaking performances and finishes that you had in major championships. But still, at the same time, you were still thinking about the next what was the next challenge, I guess, as opposed to being able to actually soak it in. Maybe that's just natural for athletes, though, that naturally you just think about what's next.
It is, and you'll always critique. I think that's how, people achieve, everything that they can is by going, yeah, I won that, but I maybe didn't have the greatest performance, or I could have done more, and what am I going to do next year? And, it definitely was something in the World Cup, when we finished, we finished fourth, and we lost to France in that semi-final, or the fourth playoff, after losing the semi-final, and you're just going, that's the one that left us behind. You're kind of going, the semi-final, not so much. England were brilliant, but for France to beat us, you go home from that World Cup and you don't look at the success that you've done. You look at, the what ifs. So I've no doubt, they have their psychologists. They're going through all that, and they'll just be focusing on this. And I've no doubt, especially when Sexton knows this is his last time here, he will. And it's just an amazing opportunity to get the Grand Slam at home with an underperforming English team.
No, great to go on, Cian.
I was just going to say, this is something I've actually spoken to James Ryan about in the past. So if you think back to 2018, when Ireland won the Grand Slam, and it was his first season, it was Andrew Porter's first season, and they won a Grand Slam. Leinster won the Heineken Cup, and you're kind of thinking, remember James Ryan went on this mad unbeaten streak, and we all kept asking him about it. I'm sure he was really annoyed, but Rob Kearney addressed or came up to James Ryan in the dressing room in Twickenham that day, Paddy's Day in 2018, and said, you need to savour this. This is not, it's not always like this, and sure enough, Ireland have had to wait, another whatever it is years to get another chance to win a Grand Slam. So I think it's such a good point that Grace makes. I think Sexton will be someone, I think, that will be really driving that message this week, because He's obviously been there, he's done it, but I think he needs to get the message across to the guys that Rob Kearney did in 2018, that you've got to, if you get the job done, like, you've got to cherish these moments. And I think supporters do as well, really. You know, like, this is such a massive weekend for Irish rugby. Will, you touched on the 20s going for a Grand Slam in Musgrave Park on Sunday, and just even as I was walking in here, there was loads of Irish fans standing outside the Ireland team hotel already. Like, and, you know, there is a serious buzz about this, like with being Paddy's weekend and all that's in it. But these are really special times for Irish rugby. Obviously they have to go and get the job done, but this is an exceptional Ireland team. It's not always going to be like this. You know, they're playing the best rugby in the world. Like, every team is analysing them so much because they want to know how are Ireland playing like this. So that brings pressure though with it as well, you know. We've mentioned several times that no Irish team has, you know, won a Grand Slam in Dublin, and that brings a lot of pressure. Like, they're trying to frame it as a final, which obviously it is, and they did the same for the third test in New Zealand last summer, and that was a bit different because, number one, no one expected them to win that third test, and number two, it was at the other side of the world. You didn't have the hype wasn't the same, you know. It was on early morning here, but now it's very different. Like, you know, the players have been speaking about it all week. Johnny Sexton said he's had to turn his phone off because he's trying to just keep, you know, focused on the task at hand. Anytime they're out in the street, going to the shop, people, and it's all goodwill, people are wishing them luck, but that brings pressure as well because the players know what's at stake, but also I think the public do as well. So everything points to Ireland being in a place on the back of, you know, Grace is touching at the work that they've done with Gary Keegan, that their mental resilience, like that they showed again last week, means that they should get the job done. But I just think, you know, being at home and it's going to be great just brings a different kind of pressure, I think, that they're going to have to handle. Yeah,
no Ireland team's ever beaten an England team with Manu Tuilagi in it. He is going to start at inside centre. The England team named a little bit earlier today as well. So Tuilagi's been picked at 12. Owen Farrell has been picked at out half. A lot of this was kind of telegraphed, I think, during the week by the English press. It was very clear where they were going to go. So Marcus Smith is on the bench, and that means a fundamental shift after what happened last week.
Yeah, we spoke about this at length on last week's show. Like, I just don't think Steve Borthwick knows if he's coming or going. I found it strange that Marcus Smith was playing because I just don't think Marcus Smith is a Steve Borthwick type player. As exceptional as Marcus Smith is, he hasn't proven himself at test level yet. Like, it wasn't his fault that England got absolutely hammered last week, but he didn't exactly press his claims to, you know, say that I am going to be the next long-term England 10. So it's hard to know whether they're coming or going, England, and I don't think Borthwick knows as well. I mean, Manu Tuilagi has been so injury prone over the last few years, and lots of people, English supporters, and, you know, okay, he's 6 games, he's never lost.
Missed rugby due to suspension. He's not coming in off the back of a good run.
Exactly, and he hasn't been the same player that everyone kind of likes to think he was when he was one of the best leading centres. I know Brian O'Driscoll speaks really highly of him as well, but he's not the same player he was. So England are going to come to the end of the Six Nations, I think, and like be wondering, like, what did we actually, not that what did we achieve, because clearly they're not going to have achieved anything, but in terms of actually building and going forward, by playing all these guys, like, there hasn't been, I don't think, that shift that they were hoping for. And the ironic thing was, like, there was boos in Twickenham last November before Eddie Jones got the sack, and it was because the side of rugby wasn't, you know, what they wanted to see. But then they got a guy in, Steve Borthwick, who, if anyone watched his Leicester Tigers team, now they won a premiership with it, but like, it's rugby from the dark ages, really, like, you know. And once Leicester got into the Champions Cup, they didn't fire a shot. It was the same when Harlequins won the Premiership and got into the Champions Cup. They didn't fire a shot. Now, Harlequins obviously play very differently to Leicester, but I think it's similar to Warren Gatland taking over Wales in terms of Borthwick. The game has moved on. You know, the game has moved on from that kind of attritional rate. Now, South Africa would probably argue that they can still do it, but they have the cattle to do it. I don't look at this England pack and go, they're going to be able to beat up Ireland this weekend, which has happened in the past. So picking Smith last week was interesting, but I just never felt like that this was going to be the way forward for England under Borthwick. I actually still think that come the World Cup, I would not be surprised if everyone's fit, if George Ford is the starting England 10. He delivered so time and time again for Borthwick at Leicester, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be a Ford Farrell. And you talk about Back to the Future, like, that's kind of what they were doing years ago. So Marcus Smith's in a bit of limbo, you know. Nick Evans is in as tack coach. I was making this point last week that maybe he was having a bit more of an influence, but I wonder how much of it was Borthwick, and I don't know, and this might sound harsh, but I wonder how much of it was kind of playing to the public perception, because there are so many calls for England to get Marcus Smith in, let's go in this new direction. But there's no point in putting Marcus Smith in the team unless you're going to put everything else around him and change the philosophy as well. So there's been nothing to suggest in England so far that that's the way they're going to move to play. And I think you're going through the team selection there, that suggests, we know what we're going to expect from them against Ireland on Saturday.
Yeah, so the England team starting from fullback, so Freddie Stewart's going to be a fullback, Anthony Watson on one wing. They're going to have Henry Ardnell on the other wing. The midfield is Slade and Tuilagi. Owen Farrell is going to captain the team from 10. Van Poortvliet is number 9. Then the forwards going from the front row, Ellis Genge is going to be at loosehead. Jamie George is playing hooker. Sinclair is on the tight head side. Itoje and Ribbons are going to be in the second row. Ludlam, Willis and Dombrandt are going to be the back row. So that is the England team for this week. And it's one of those things, Grace, it seems almost like a reset after what happened last week against France, but it's not down to the 10-12 channel why they were conceding as much as they did last week at Twickenham in that record defeat.
No, it wasn't. And yes, you can see Marcus Smith's a bit of a maverick, and they don't, you can't visibly see a game plan bar kick it in behind and hope the opposition makes mistakes. But when you look, there's Chesham is missing now again, Laws is out. Toje he's not been as ruthless or as aggressive in the ruck area as other years. He just seems to be not firing. They're missing the likes of the big ball carriers like Billy Villapola. So they just don't seem, and like I love what do you say, the back row, which the flanker,
Jack Willis.
Yeah, Jack Willis.
I love him. I love his story. I love the fact that he came back. He had done his knee, came back. He got injured again. He's come back, but he's just not back on that performance form. Where he's getting stuck in and having those big aggressive carries. When you look at who he's opposite and Van der Fleer and where he's at, and I think you look how Ireland have developed, and you see the likes of Tadhg Furlong when teams are like, oh my God, he's stepping people and he's a prop. But that's what Irish rugby expects now. They want the Tadhg Byrne, they want the Tadhg Furlongs, Conan, all those big guys are able to run direct, but they're able to use their feet, evade, get the offload, put somebody else through a gap, get the pullbacks, so they've grown in such their skill sets that you don't know where the threat is. You don't know whether it's going to be up front or pull back. And whereas England just don't seem to have that. They're trying to bulldog through, keep going or kick it. When they go through like 5-6 phases, haven't really got anywhere, then right, we'll kick it down, or they actually slow the ball down to box kick it back. So I just see the pack not matching up, even though, their scrums, line-outs, you look statistically, they're really positive and they've one of the highest ones in the Six Nations, but that doesn't mean that. And if you're not winning games and you can't manage around the park, and especially the ruck speed.
No, for sure. We'll talk more about the English challenge and also the other games on Saturday when we come back in a moment. The Six Nations show is with Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
The Six Nations show on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
The Six Nations show on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Welcome back. Grace Davitt, Cian Tracey here with me. We're looking forward to the games at the weekend, on the final weekend of the Six Nations Championship, understandably with a bit of a focus on Ireland against England, where Ireland could potentially win the championship and with it a Grand Slam. Cian, we've been accused a few times across the week of being a little bit dismissive of England and the challenge that they bring. But I was listening to the post-mortem on ITV last weekend where you had Woodward and also Johnny Wilkinson talking, and Johnny Wilkinson was trying to give some crumbs of comfort, I think, to English supporters by saying, look, we shipped a couple of heavy beatings. He referenced he played against South Africa and New Zealand where 50 odd points were run up on them and they were able to reset pretty quickly. But I can't help but think this England team are too far down the road, even going to a World Cup, to be able to turn this round at this stage.
Yeah, I didn't see ITV the coverage, but I'm not surprised Wilkinson was probably glass half full, because he still works with a lot of the players. He works with the kickers, so he's kind of semi-part of the coaching staff, which is just an interesting dynamic in itself. Look, Grace touched on a couple of interesting points, I think, before the break, just in terms of the pack, and a big reason I think England haven't been as good as what they were is Itoje just hasn't been the same player. And like, he did an interview last week in one of the English papers, and he said that he had an underlying health condition that was actually hindering him over the last while. So, you know, you don't know what's going on, I suppose, outside of the 80 minutes that we get to see on the pitch. But I just think the balance of their team, their front row grand, like, that's settled and that's decent on its day. But for me, the back row is a big issue for England. Like, Grace touched on Jack Willis, and you know, he's had obviously a difficult time. He was with Wasps, he's gone over to Toulouse now, and it sounds like he's going to sign on and stay with Toulouse. But like, the guys either side of him, Don Brandon Ludlam, I mean, I don't get the English Alex Dombrand hype, I have to say. I think there's an element that he's a bit of a flat track bully. I think when he's playing in the Premiership and playing against, you know, weaker teams, he can look exceptional. But I mean, he hasn't done much in an English shirt, and I think he's very lucky to be keeping his place this weekend. I actually think he's probably a sort of a consequence of the Premiership being overhyped to the absolute max. Like, we've seen it time and time again that, like, if you watch the Premiership on the channel that it's on, you would swear that it is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's repeatedly shown that it's not. And I think that's a big issue for England at the moment. There's no relegation in the Premiership at the moment, so you're seeing these mad high scoring games, but like, when it comes to Test rugby, that's not really what it's about, unless you're playing France at Twickenham, of course, and they put the high score on you. So I just don't think that that's good preparation. I made the point about Leicester and Harlequins earlier. When they were champions, barely fired a shot in the Champions Cup. Leinster went over to Welford Road in the quarter-final and did an absolute number on them. So yeah, I think that's a big issue. I think scrum half is an issue. I have not been impressed with Jack Van Poortvliet, I think, at all. I was kind of surprised maybe that they didn't go back to Ben Youngs, given that they're going back to the rest of the kind of the golden oldies. And okay, like, maybe, you know, Borthwick wants to stick with him and he sees him being the scrum half going to the World Cup, but God, like, I mean, if you compare the two scrum halves, which may be a little bit unfair, that were on show last weekend, like Van Poortvliet and DuPont, it was men against boys stuff, really. So I think Ireland will look at the English back row, and I think they'll look to get after Jack Van Poortvliet. So there are a couple, I think, weaknesses that I see in that English pack. And it seems like Borthwick is going to stick with these guys going towards the World Cup. Obviously, Tom Curry is injured at the moment, and he's definitely a loss from the back row. But if England are going to the World Cup, to go back to your original point, and Van Poortvliet's the scrum half and Alex Dombrand's the number 8, like, the only thing in their favour is they're at the favourable side of the draw, which is another story in itself, that just the half of the draw that Ireland and Scotland are on. But I wouldn't.
Argentina probably licking their lips, and I'm sure Eddie Jones is looking at this potentially playing a quarter-final against them as well.
And like, they do have time to turn around, and I am conscious of the fact that when Andy Farrell took over as Ireland head coach, it wasn't great at the start, but they never had a hammering like England had at home, a record defeat at home. So you would still be cautious of them turning up, but all logic would suggest that this Ireland team are in just a different stratosphere altogether compared to England.
Would you agree with that, Grace? Even if England come and bring a big challenge and there's a reaction to what happened last week at Twickenham, Ireland should still have enough for them?
Yeah, totally. And they have that mindset that they can wear them down. So there'll be no panic. There'll be, war of attrition at the start, break them down, kick in behind them, win the territory. They're two territorial teams, but all it takes is one opportunity for Ireland. England's biggest thing is kicking behind. We see how dangerous Ireland are with the likes of Logue and Hansen, man of the match again last week. So it only takes one opportunity. And I know Ireland, with that counter-attack, we see their secret sneaky plays, that they get tries from. So I have no doubt they'll wear this England team down. They'll make the changes, they'll bring on fresh legs, and they'll just keep turning the screw. And it might not be pretty at times, but I've no doubt that they still will win, even if it is a really big battle.
If anyone is following Mystic Andy Dunn, who has been very good in his predictions so far, I think it was 28-10 he went for last night in Wednesday Night Rugby. Maybe the points total was to go for 32, though. The last two times that Ireland have beaten England in the last couple of years, they've scored 32 points exactly. So there is a trend towards that number. But Andy reckons around 18 points being the difference this time round. He was spot on with both the France and Scotland games so far. So one to watch out for. Also on Saturday afternoon, we've got Wales keen very much going back to basics with the way they've picked their team. team and huge experience in that pack again, which is weird because at the start it was like, oh, all the golden oldies are back to play against Ireland. Then let's introduce some players. Then understandably there's been a lot of off the field, so you can understand some of the mix-up. But then very much going back to these elder statesmen in the front row, guys with 100 plus caps, as they go up against France in Paris.
Yeah, like I kind of touched on this earlier when I was making the point about England not knowing whether they're coming or going. Like, it must be just so frustrating to be a Welsh supporter given everything that's going on off the pitch, but also you haven't a clue what team is going to play week to week. And I don't know, like, by the end of it, when Warren Gatland kind of reflects on, you know, Wales's campaign in terms of like who has he blooded and how is the World Cup team going to look, I don't really think he's going to be that much wiser. He's tried a lot of young guys, but if you are going to try these young guys, surely you have to stick with them and give them a chance. This is a free shot for Wales this weekend. Now, I know it's in Paris and it could be ugly, and maybe that does factor into the thinking that you don't want to, it doesn't want to be like lambs to the slaughter in terms of throwing in loads of young guys, but it's a dead rubber. Would you not like to throw them in now and, you know, see how they cope with playing in Paris, which, you know, the World Cup is going to be on in France. You're going to have to get used to everything that comes with that, whereas they're gone back to, like you said, the likes of Bigger, they're gone back to who are they gone back to, Tipperick and Faletau and all these lads, like the centres, Nick Tompkins and George North. Again, like last week they were looking like, okay, they have a potentially exciting new centre combination, and I know they haven't exactly shot the lights out, but again, I just think you have to back these guys and give them time, particularly that you've nothing to play for. So yeah, Welsh rugby is in a really, really tricky spot. Obviously they got the win last weekend and lots of people were kind of back in Italy almost to get the job done, but Italy were really, really disappointing. So maybe they'll take some confidence going into that, but God, like after seeing how well France played last week, if Wales don't turn up, like that could be a really, really heavy scoreline. Like I'd be fearful for Wales going to Paris this weekend.
Grace, there is that potential for this to put a very different complexion on the championship for France, because the way they look at it is, okay, they laboured a little bit to the victory against Scotland after giving Ireland a right good push at the Aviva. Then they go and put a record scoreline up on England last week, and if they finish out with a good win against Wales, they're thinking things are just cooking nicely ahead of a home World Cup here.
Yeah, it is. But at the same time, you know, hammering England, great, you know, but does it teach you anything? Probably not. You know, yeah, it shows how well you've done, but does it show where your weakness is and you know, the kinks in the chain are? No. When you look at our Italy game and, you know, we didn't perform very well. We know we've seen issues out in that 13 channel, but then that means we can actually work on them. We can see where teams might try and attack us, what the issues are. And I think that's, you know, they'll probably focus on that. France, you know, post Ireland game, and we're like, right, we need to be better here. This is where we were struggling, and then put a great score against England. But you know, playing Wales, I don't see it as any challenge to them. I think, you know, with the momentum and the speed of play that they have and the movement and counter-attack, I just think it's going to be just a mediocre game for them. And like, you want the big hard games, you want the challenges, you want to be able to learn more about yourself than the opposition, especially going into a World Cup. And I don't know, depending how well Wales do, but I can see France just steamrolling them, to be honest.
I thought last week was a really actually important moment for France. They hadn't won at Twickenham in a long time. It was also the last time they're going to be playing away from home for a very long time as well. So I think that was a big monkey off their back they had to get. But I also think it was the manner in which they played, and I do agree with Grace, obviously, like England, how poor England were massively contribute to this. But France hadn't been playing well, and they hadn't been playing good rugby, I would say, in the Six Nations so far. So they won a Grand Slam last year, but they kick at the ball a lot. They kick the ball more than any team, and I think that that's all well and good when you're winning, but if there's any fans that are going to get on your back, it's the French. So while that style is grand when you're winning, I think when it goes wrong, I think you'd start seeing little cracks. But what we saw last week was the Jouet France of old, and it was stunning to watch, absolutely stunning. So my sense would be that maybe, you know, France, and there's been a bit of chat about this, that they kind of front loaded the competition in terms of how hard they were working the players, because they're going to taper them off as they go towards the World Cup. And obviously they're different because they're playing week in, week out in the top 14, and they've become more better aligned with that. But I felt like that was a big moment, because not just did they win at Twickenham, they won away from home, the style of rugby that they played. It was a reminder, I think, that of wow, this French team is exceptional when they turn it on.
They didn't let up either. Like, they easily could have almost effectively declared it 50 minutes in, but they decided to keep demolishing.
You saw the scenes in the coach's box and what it meant, and you saw Fabien Galthié was really emotional after the game. So yeah, I felt like that was a big moment. Obviously the focus in that game has mostly been on England because they were so dire, but that is a warning, I think, for Ireland as much as anyone else, if they were to come up with France in the World Cup, that okay, beating them in Dublin was one thing, but like once you get to the Stade de France, I know the game was on at Twickenham last weekend, but they're bloody tough to beat there, and that was just a reminder that they haven't gone away.
Big weekend for Ben Healy as well, Grace, coming up from, so Finn Russell misses out this weekend with injury, so Blair Kinghorn is going to start at 10, but Healy has been named on the bench for Scotland, so he's in line to come on and win his first cap in the early kick-off. That's the 12:30 match at Murrayfield when Scotland play against Italy. Disappointing obviously last week for Scotland to miss out on the opportunity of winning a first generation Triple Crown for them, but there's still the opportunity for them to finish well up the table if they're to get a good win against Italy. And for Ben Healy, this is going to be a special moment, and this is what it's all been about joining up with this squad to now get a chance to get some game time ahead of the World Cup and his first cap in the Six Nations as well.
Yeah, and you know, what a team to do it against. Italy, you know, you're against Garbisi. He's, you know, key player for Italy, and he's an amazing player. And I think it's nice for Healy. He's going to be on that bench. He's going to see what way Italy are playing. You know, he'll have done his analysis, get Kinghorn to, you know, bed in there and hopefully get a few scores up. I've no doubt. I really believe Scotland are going to win the game. I know Italy are a tough opposition, but I think Scotland are very good. And, you know, we saw how well they did against Ireland in the very start of that game last week. So, you know, he can watch. And I think when you become part of a team like that, and, you know, obviously he's with Scotland and he's relishing that, you know, the last thing you want is not to get the opportunity to show yourself and show why you've put all this work in, why you've made this move. And I hope he gets his chance. I hope he gets to come on, and you know, I really believe that Scotland will get the win. So if they get a few scores up and he gets the opportunity to come on, especially, it would have been hard if he was on the bench, you know, behind Russell. You maybe wouldn't have seen it as much, but you know, you have to take your opportunities in rugby. Someone else's loss is your game.
Yeah, I thought last week it was just going to work out in such a way that Healy might be on the bench to play against Ireland, but the opportunity is going to come from at some point this weekend where he gets a chance to show what Gregor Townsend said. This guy can be a game changer. He was talking about how well he kicks and the lines that he runs for Munster. I genuinely feel that Townsend is actually a bit of a Healy fan.
Oh, well, he absolutely is. There's a reason he's leaving Munster at the end of the season. There's a reason he's playing for Scotland. There's a reason why Glasgow tried to get him a couple of years ago. Gregor Townsend has been the one behind this from day dot, as soon as it became apparent that he was Scottish qualified through his mother's side of the family. So it's a great story. Like, Munster fans will obviously prefer that if he was staying, but like, this is a show of ambition from a young guy who wants to play Test rugby. I believe Andy Farrell had a conversation with him, and he was honest and upfront and kind of told him where he stood in the pecking order. And Ben Healy said, "Look, hey, this is a short career. Like, let's go and make the most of it." And when I was over in Scotland last weekend, I was chatting to a couple of Scottish journalists, just trying to get a sense of how he was getting on, and they said the word on the ground is that he's been getting on really, really well in training. And obviously, you know, it was going to take an injury, although I still wonder if Ben Healy might have gotten his chance just to make sure that Gregor Townsend captures him. Not that they'd be that cynical, but sometimes people work like that. Just get him capped and make sure that there's no chance that Ireland can come back and get him before the World Cup or whatever. So yeah, the word on the ground over in Scotland is that he's been training really, really well. He was actually doing the warm-up last weekend against Ireland, so it kind of showed you how tantalisingly close that situation was. If Ben Healy had come on and kicked a winning penalty, I think he travelled to Paris with the squad, so he's been in the thick of it. He's going well, and yeah, like, I think, you know, Grace touched on Blair Kinghorn there. Like, I still think Blair Kinghorn's best position is in the back three, potentially a full back. And there's been a lot of Scottish fans who, you know, Stuart Hogg won his 100 cap last week, but there's been a few kind of murmurings that maybe Blair Kinghorn could be a better option, you know, a kind of a younger version, if you like, of Hogg. And I wouldn't be convinced of Blair Kinghorn as a 10. Now, he could have a good game, but it'll be against Italy. But if it doesn't go well for Blair Kinghorn, like, Ben Healy could come on, and it's a real opportunity to become the backup 10 to Finn Russell come the World Cup. Obviously his kind of main job, I think, at the moment is to make sure he's in the squad, but I think the stars could align here for him. And then, you know, if Finn Russell was to pick up an injury, then Ben Healy is suddenly the starting Scotland out half, potentially against Ireland in the World Cup pool stages, which would be amazing, really, an amazing story. So yeah, it's a great story and delighted for him.
Grace, just to give Italy a final word here, we talked last week on the show about how impressive some of the performances have been, but they'll probably be horribly disappointed if they end this without a win at the end of this Six Nations. And last week, to me, felt like a massive opportunity lost against the Wales team.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just another letdown. It's like, the Italy team that nearly did it. I heard a couple of the players and they're just saying, yeah, great, we put performances in, but if we don't get the wins and we don't get, moved up the pecking order, then what is the point? But for the spectator, you're seeing every year how the gap is closing. We see that first game against France and they were immense. They were immense in the pack, their physicality, their strength, their footwork, just their decision making. We see a few years ago, those offloads wouldn't have gone to hand. They would have thrown away opportunities, but now we see them stick a lot more often. I still think they need to work on that exit strategy. I think they would give any coach a heart attack with the way they throw the ball around. And, you have Vardy, who's young, when he's in there and he's a bit green at times with that exit, but I've no doubt, they'll keep developing. And, it's just heartbreaking that they didn't get the win against France. And like, as you say, then Wales had their back against the wall as well, and they really, needed to get that win. So it's really difficult at the bottom of the pool, and England are there now in that bottom three as well. And every match is a battle to try and move up that leaderboard and not get that wooden spoon.
Yeah, we're going to have updates and reaction across the weekend. Huge Saturday of rugby coming up here on Off the Ball. You can catch all the reaction on Sunday's Off the Ball as well. You have been listening and watching the Six Nations show with Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
The Six Nations show on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.